The Water-Sprite of the Lake by the Brothers Grimm. In olden times once lived a miller and his wife in great happiness. They had money enough and to spare, for it went on increasing year after year. But misfortune often comes at night, or as the proverb means, when we least expect it, and so it was with the miller. He gradually lost all he had gained, and at last became so poor that he could scarcely call his mill his own. He was so full of sorrow that, although he worked hard all day, he would lie tossing on his bed all night, unable to sleep. One morning he rose at daybreak and went out, thinking that the fresh air of the morning would lighten his heart. As he passed along by the mill dam, the first ray of sunlight glittered upon it, and he heard behind him a strange ripple of the water. He turned quickly and saw a beautiful woman rising gently out of the stream. Her long hair hung over her shoulders, and she put it back from her face with her delicate hands, and allowed it to fall over her like a veil. The miller saw at once that it was the Water-Sprite of the lake, and knew not whether to stay or fly in his fright. But the fair vision called him by name in her soft voice, and inquired why he looked so sad. The miller had at first been almost stunned, but on hearing her speak so kindly, he took courage and told her that, after having lived in wealth and honor for many years, he was now so poor that he knew not how to help himself. "Be at rest, then," said the Water-Sprite. "I will make you richer and happier than you have ever been before, if you will promise to give me the first young thing that is born in your house." "That will be no doubt a puppy or kitten," thought the miller, and at once promised what she asked. The Water-Sprite immediately disappeared in the water, and the miller returned with renewed courage to his mill. He had scarcely reached the house when a maidservant came from the door and told him in a joyful voice that his wife had a fine little boy. On hearing this, the miller stood as if thunderstruck. He saw at once that the malicious Water-Sprite had betrayed him into a fatal promise. He went into his wife's room with his head bowed down and looking so sad that she said, "Are you not pleased at having a little son?" Then he was obliged to tell her all that had occurred, and what a terrible promise he had made to the Water-Sprite. "What is the use of all the riches and honors in the world," he said, "if I am to lose my child?" And now what could he do? None of his relations who came to wish him joy could give him any advice. However, from that day good fortune came back to the miller's house. Everything he did prospered. It seemed as if his chests and coffers filled themselves, and the money in his desk increased during the night, and in a short time the miller was richer than ever. But his wealth could not bring him happiness, for the fatal promise to the Water-Sprite cruelly tormented his heart. Every time he passed by the lake, he expected to see her rise out of the water and claim her debt. He would not allow the child to go near it, and often said to him, "Take care, my boy. If you ever touch that water, a hand will rise up and drag you under." But as days and years rolled by, and the Water-Sprite never again made her appearance, the miller began to feel more at ease. When the boy grew up to a young man, he was placed with a gamekeeper to learn the use of a gun. He was a clever lad, and soon became so expert in the business that a gentleman near the town took him into his service as a gamekeeper. In this town lived a beautiful and true maiden, with whom the young keeper fell in love. His master, on hearing this, gave them a small but pretty cottage when they were married, and they lived in peace and contentment, loving each other very fondly. One day, when the keeper was hunting a deer in full chase, the animal ran out of the forest into a field, where he overtook it and with one shot brought it to the ground. So earnest was he over his sport that he did not notice his nearness to the dangerous water in which lived the Water-Sprite. After he had killed and cut up the deer, he went to wash his blood-stained hands in the water. No sooner, however, had he touched it than the Water-Sprite rose, and with a smile entwined her arms around him and drew him down so quickly that the waves closed over him, and scarcely a ripple remained to show where he had gone. When evening came on and the keeper did not return, his wife was in great trouble, and at last went out to look for him. He had often told her of the danger to which he was exposed by his father's promise to the Water-Sprite, and how he was obliged to avoid carefully the water of the mill-stream, and to this she hastened at once in great fear. On arriving at the bank of the stream, she saw the game that her husband had killed lying near the water, and knew directly the fate which had come upon him. wringing her hands, and with loud lamentations she called him by name again and again, running from side to side of the water. She reproached the Water-Sprite for her cruelty with hard words, but there was no reply. The water remained as smooth as a mirror, in which the face of the half-moon was clearly reflected. The poor young wife could not leave the mill stream. She kept walking up and down without ceasing, sometimes in silence, and at other times complaining in low murmurs or uttering cries of despair. At last she became so worn out that she sank to the ground and fell into a deep sleep, in which she dreamed a wonderful dream. She dreamed that she was walking over rugged rocks, and as she walked, thorns and nettles pricked and stung her feet. The rain beat in her face, and the wind blew her long hair in wild confusion. But on reaching the top, a very different scene presented itself. The sky was blue, the air soft and warm, while the sides of the mountain sloped downwards to verdant meadows, enameled with bright flowers, in which stood a charming cottage. She approached and opened the door of the cottage, in which sat an old woman with white hair, who looked kindly at her. But just as she was about to speak, the poor wife awoke from her dream. Day was just breaking, and she knew she had slept a long time, but she felt refreshed, and she remembered that just such a mountain as she had seen in her dream was not far distant. She immediately turned her steps towards it, and after climbing up with some difficulty, reached the top, and found all as it had appeared in her dream. The old woman of the cottage received her very kindly, and pointing to a chair, asked her to be seated. "You must be suffering from some great misfortune," she said, "or you would not have sought my lonely hut. Tell me what it is." The poor wife then related with tears all that had happened. "Be comforted, poor child," said the old woman. "I will help you. Take this golden comb, and when the moon is full, go to the mill pond, seat yourself on the bank, and comb out your long black hair. When you have done this, lay the comb on the shore, and wait and see what happens." The keeper's wife returned home, but the time till the moon became full seemed very long. At last, as the luminous disk appeared in the heavens, she went quickly out, seated herself by the mill pond, and began combing her long black hair with the golden comb. When she had finished, she placed the comb on the brink of the mill stream and waited. In a very short time the water bubbled up from the deep. A wave rose, rolled towards the shore, and carried away the golden comb as it receded. The comb could scarcely have sunk to the bottom when the water divided, and the head of the gamekeeper appeared just above it. He did not speak, and had only time to look sorrowfully at his wife, before a second wave rose with a rushing sound and covered the man's head. In a few moments the water lay at rest, tranquil and calm as ever, while on its smooth surface nothing could be seen but the face of the full moon reflected on it. The poor wife returned home with all her hope fled, but during the night she again dreamed of the little cottage in the meadow and the old woman. So in the morning she hastened to visit the good fairy and tell her her tale of sorrow. The wise woman comforted her as before, and giving her this time a golden flute, she said, "Wait for another full moon, and then take this flute. Seat yourself on the shore, and play upon it one of your sweetest songs, and when it is finished, lay the flute on the ground near the brink, and you will see what happens." The keeper's wife did exactly as the old woman told her. Scarcely had she finished her music and placed the flute on the shore, than the water began to bubble and foam as before, and a wave rose and carried the flute away with it. Almost at the same moment the water divided, and not only the head and shoulders, but nearly half the body of her husband rose above the surface. He held out his arms towards her with loving eyes, but a second wave rose with a rushing sound, covered the poor man, and drew him under. "Ah me!" cried the unfortunate wife. "What is the use of my only having a passing glance at my dear husband, and then to lose him again immediately?" Sorrow again took possession of her heart, but on dreaming the same dream about the cottage and the old woman, her hopes revived, and she once more paid her a visit. This time the good fairy gave her a golden spinning wheel, comforted her, and said, "You have not done all that is necessary yet. You must wait for another full moon, then take your golden spinning wheel, seat yourself on the shore, and spin till the bobbins are full. Then place the spinning wheel near the water, and wait." The wife followed out all these directions correctly, but when she placed the spinning wheel on the shore, the water bubbled up more violently than ever. A mighty wave arose, and in a moment swept it away. No sooner had it disappeared than with a sudden flash the head and then the whole body of the gamekeeper rose above the water, and quick as lightning he sprang ashore, seized his wife by the hand, and fled. But scarcely had they gone a few steps when the whole water raised itself with a rushing noise, and with irresistible force spread over field and meadow. Already the two fugitives saw nothing but death before them, and just as they gave themselves up for lost, they were in a moment changed, the wife into a frog, and the husband into a toad. The flood reached them, and although they escaped death, the waters separated them from each other and carried them in different directions. As soon as the waters receded and left them on dry ground, they resumed their proper shapes, but neither of them knew what had become of the other. They found themselves among strange people in a foreign country and separated from their own home by high mountains and deep valleys which lay between them. To support themselves they were both obliged to keep sheep, and for many years they tended their herds and flocks in field and meadow, weighed down with sorrow and regret at being separated from each other. Time passed on, and the sweet flowers bloomed at the breath of spring, and one day the two sad ones were tending their flocks, and the husband, seeing a flock of sheep grazing on the hillside in a pleasant green spot, led his own flock towards it, and very soon the two flocks were feeding together, but their keepers did not recognize each other. Still, they were each pleased to find a companion in their loneliness. From that day they led their sheep to the pasture side by side, and although they did not talk much, there was consolation in each other's society. One evening, when the full moon was shining in the sky, and the sheep at rest around them, the shepherd took a flute out of his pocket and played a charming though mournful air upon it. When he had finished, he looked at the shepherdess and saw that she was weeping bitterly. "Why do you weep so?" he asked. "Ah," she replied, "the full moon was shining as brightly in the sky the last time I played that air on my flute, and my dearest one appeared to me above the water." He looked at her earnestly as she spoke. A veil seemed to fall from his eyes, and he recognized his dear and long-lost wife, and the moon, as he looked at her, shone brightly on his face, causing her to recognize him at the same moment. They instantly fell into each other's arms and kissed each other with joy, and from that happy moment neither of them wanted nor asked any greater good fortune. The End.